the wild Pacific coast of Vancouver Island, an ancient and rugged landscape off the western shore of British Columbia. From the icy peaks of age-old mountain glaciers to the fog-shrouded canopies of Canada's only rainforest. This is the wettest place in North America. A primitive habitat where the Pacific Ocean holds the key to life.
That's why this is one of the most remarkable places on Earth.
A land locked in time, where nature and the human spirit coexist.
It's just everything you'd want if you're an adventurous person.
A paradise for creatures, adapted to life by the sea, and a never-before-seen view of one of the most sacred places on Earth. Vancouver Island's Pacific coast. A lush, old-growth rainforest that spans nearly 300 miles of the western shores of British Columbia, Canada. It's the largest island on the western coast of the Americas, and the wettest place in North America. Winters here are moist and mild. Temperatures rarely dip below 30 degrees. It is an unusually warm climate in a country known for its raw and bitter winters. Surprisingly, the small town of Tofino on the western shore receives the least snow of any town in Canada. But what it lacks in snow, Tofino makes up for with rain. As many as 27 feet of rain fall on Tofino each year. The downpours are seasonal. December alone brings more rain to the town than some parts of British Columbia receive in an entire year. As a result, the region is home to one of the world's most unusual ecosystems. A temperate coastal rainforest. In summer, steady heat brings little rain, and the climate feels almost Mediterranean. This truly is a place like no other in Canada. Vancouver Island sits on top of the westward-moving North American tectonic plate. It's part of the Ring of Fire, a string of volcanoes, deep ocean trenches, and earthquake zones that circles the Pacific Ocean. It's an area renowned for its violent geology and volcanic activity.
If you look at the direction in which all the continents are moving, you'll see that they're encroaching on the Pacific. So it's probably the most dangerous part of the planet because that process, and we call it subduction, generates enormous great earthquakes, it generates volcanoes, it generates tidal waves.
Continental drift causes land masses to move dramatically over time. Vancouver Island is a perfect example of this phenomenon at work. The island began its journey much farther south than it is today. It sits atop a large piece of crust called Wrangellia. Born near the equator about 380 million years ago, Wrangellia slowly drifted northeast along fault lines at a rate of about 1 foot every 7 years. As it moved and fractured, the chunk of crust carried several different landmasses, colliding into the North American plate. These include Southeast Alaska, the Haida Gwaii Archipelago on the north coast of British Columbia, and Vancouver Island.
It's like you pushing a broom across the floor and sweeping up debris. And so there's been a whole reevaluation of the geology of Western Canada, and geologists now realize it's a mosaic, and the pieces actually originate from thousands of kilometers away, and they've been added to the west coast of North America.
Perhaps surprisingly, this is not the last stop for Vancouver Island. It continues to drift northeastward toward mainland Canada, about 1 to 2 inches each year, the same speed at which fingernails grow. Eventually, in about 500,000 years, the island will collide with the mainland to create a new landmass. Tectonic plate movement in this part of the Ring of Fire is dangerous, and it's not necessarily millions of years into the future. There's something far more imminent that's of particular concern to scientists. A megathrust earthquake, known locally as the really big one. This earthquake is predicted to rival the disastrous quake and tsunami that devastated parts of Japan in 2011. Vancouver Island sits along the Cascadia subduction zone, where the North America and Juan de Fuca tectonic plates are locked in a standoff.
All the stress is building up, and there's a lot of anticipation and concern about when those plates unlock, and we get what we call a mega earthquake, a mega thrust earthquake. And it could be tomorrow, it could be next year, or maybe 1,000 years' time. But there is a history in the rocks there of these repeated mega thrust earthquakes.
At a predicted magnitude of more than 9 on the Richter scale, an earthquake this large would trigger a massive tsunami, nearly 400 miles wide, spanning from San Francisco, California, to Juneau, Alaska, and across the ocean to the far shores of the Western Pacific. The earthquake would devastate large cities, including Vancouver, Victoria, Portland, and Seattle. A quake like this is unavoidable. The question is, when will it strike? Geological records show that the last megathrust earthquake hit the Pacific coast in the year 1700. Scientists say there is a 1 in 3 chance it will happen again within the next 50 years. Vancouver, British Columbia could be among the cities worst affected.
Vancouver is built largely on very soft sediment, which was brought down by the Fraser River. So you've got this rather unstable situation of wet sediment. And we know from places like Japan, when you shake that wet sediment, it very often turns into a liquid, and buildings literally fall down through the softened sediment and tilt. So the effects of the megathrust earthquake can be actually magnified because most of the city is underlain by soft, wet sediment.
For now, the same geological processes that threaten Vancouver Island breathe life into its ecosystems. As fragments of plates have subducted under the island, its interior mountain range has risen up above. This mountain chain forms a rain shadow, an impenetrable wall of rock that prevents moisture moving inland from the ocean from passing over its peaks. It's the strongest factor in the creation of the Pacific temperate rainforest. By trapping precipitation on the west side of the island, the mountains cause huge amounts of fog and rainfall along the island's Pacific coast, creating a lush rainforest unlike any other. On the edge of this unlikely northern jungle is Mears Island, an ancient growth forest that's been held sacred for more than 1,000 years. Mears Island is home to some of the largest and oldest trees on Earth. 1,500-year-old cedars tended by local Clayoquot First Nations. It is a harmonious relationship between humans and nature that has stood the test of time.
We have an intergenerational responsibility that is passed on, to be taking care not only of the land, but the ocean, the rivers, and all the living things that are in this area.
Mears Island is Canada's first official tribal park. Faced by the threat of logging in the 1980s, local people fought to protect their sacred land from deforestation. After intense negotiations with the Canadian government, they were successful, and Mears Island was declared a tribal park in 1984. Now, under the watchful eye of Clayoquot First Nations, the island is used as a nature park, where visitors can sit among some of the oldest trees on the planet. Here on Mears Island's Big Tree Trail stands one of the largest and oldest living organisms on Earth. The hanging garden tree, a western red cedar 60 feet wide. It's more than 2,000 years old and was likely just a sapling at the dawn of Christianity. Some of these ancient red cedars can reach heights of more than 170 feet. There are only a few of these majestic giants left on Vancouver Island. Years of deforestation and development destroyed much of the island's old growth. But the time-worn cedars that do remain are able to grow to staggering proportions due to the torrents of precipitation that fall each year. Heavy rainfall in the winter and extreme fog in the summer create a constant dampness that prevents forest fires from igniting and burning down these ancient woods. But it isn't just a warm, sodden climate that keeps this forest flourishing. It's protected by another guardian. One so small, it's easily overlooked, buried beneath the feet of visitors. Yet so large, it connects the trees of the forest, forming one of the most immense organisms on Earth. Fungus. Fungus is the lifeblood of this rainforest ecosystem. It feeds nutrients to trees and animals through a living network that exists just below the mossy forest floor.
You're on a living mat that connects one tree species to another tree species.
Each tree is connected to others by fungal roots called mycelium. These strands of living tissue carry nitrogen and phosphorus, nutrients that help plants grow. The connections are so strong that cutting down a tree in one end of the forest can impact a tree on the opposite end. This fungal network has been called Earth's natural internet and can serve as a warning system for impending disease. Trees pick up on chemical signals of distress from their neighbors that travel through the network.
All of these creatures, these tree creatures, these Ents, as in Lord of the Rings, truly are connected by a real physical and biological connection.
Like the constant moisture of the rainforest, this fungal network is key to the survival of old growth. It provides 1,000-year-old trees with the nutrients they need to keep growing. Although science does not yet fully understand the complexity of these networks, it's clear that this unique habitat could not exist without them.
When you go out into the forest, you're walking on life, life connecting with other creatures. It's not some spiritual thing, it's a real thing, yet behind it is this spirit of life, the spirit of evolution. That's why this is one of the most remarkable places on Earth.
This remarkable place is also home to a diversity of wildlife, nourished by the lush forests and nutrient-rich intertidal zones. Here, a black bear goes in search of breakfast. Hungry predators like him take advantage of low tides that expose small prey in the early morning and turn shorelines into a buffet of mollusks and crustaceans. It's 8 a.m., low tide, and the best time to find food. But it's a race against the clock. Every minute counts. In just a few hours, the high tide will wash back in, hiding prey under more than 9 feet of water. But for now, clams, oysters, and crabs are ripe for the picking. The black bear is the smallest bear of the 3 species in North America. But this is no average black bear. This is a Vancouver Island black bear, an endemic subspecies of the common black bear. Here, the bears run larger than their mainland cousins. Females weigh an average of 400 pounds, while males can tip the scales at more than 600 pounds, the weight of a large touring motorcycle. Green shore crabs scuttle off, wary of the bears that feed on this bank. They're common on the shores of Vancouver Island and make a tasty snack. The breakfast buffet of the intertidal zone feeds more than the local bear population. Crows and gulls also take advantage of the exposed shoreline, pecking for small prey and scavenging the remains left by larger animals. These opportunistic hunters find plenty of food on the nutrient-rich beaches. Larger birds make this coastline home as well. A bald eagle rests in a cedar tree, its keen eyes able to spot small prey 100 feet below. Eagles find easy meals on these shores during low tide. Today, the shores begin to clear out around noon. The feast dies down as the high tides creep back in. But another kind of frenzy is just getting started. Powerful waves crash along the shores, creating ideal conditions for the best surfing in Canada. With more than 20 miles of surfable beach break, Tofino is known worldwide as a top spot to catch a wave. Surfers flock here year-round.
I really like surfing early in the morning before the wind picks up and before people wake up. You can, find waves where it'll just be you and your friends surfing for 3 or 4 days if you make the effort to maybe go on a plane ride or a boat ride or really hike down in through some forest. Or if you just want to be lazy and surf the beaches that are right on your doorstep, there's probably about 5 or 6 beaches that you can surf here.
Water temperatures remain cool but consistent at about 50 degrees. Surfing here is a year-round sport. The largest waves come in winter when the surf rises with powerful swells. But each surfer's ideal wave is different.
My favorite time of year to surf is the fall, when the water's still kind of warm from the summer, but the waves start to get bigger. We start to get some bigger swells coming in.
Chesterman Beach, with its dramatic V shape, is a surfer's playground. Dissected at its point by Frank Island, the beach is split perfectly in two. South Chesterman packs a punch, with southern swells and northwest winds. North Chesterman provides the opposite experience, with climbing northwest swells and southeasterly winds. Surfers don wetsuits to ward off chilly water temperatures. And there are other hazards for surfers in Tofino. In addition to bears on the beach, there are orcas in these waters. Surfers have been forced out of the sea by circling pods of killer whales, though there's never been an attack. For nature lovers and adventure seekers, there is more to Tofino than rolling waves.
If I'm not surfing, I'm hiking, and not just hiking the beaches. Like within an hour's drive of here, you can hike up a beautiful mountain, like up a waterfall, and swim in a lake, you know, up the top. It's just everything you'd want if you're an adventurous, fun-loving person.
But other places along the same stretch of shoreline are not so hospitable. The Pacific coastal region between northern Oregon and the top of Vancouver Island is one of North America's most treacherous coastlines. Unpredictable weather, jagged shores, and intense fog have sunk thousands of ships, earning this stretch of coastline the nickname the Graveyard of the Pacific. The historic Amphitrite Lighthouse has helped sailors navigate the island's treacherous coastlines for more than 100 years. The lighthouse was built in 1906 after the tragic sinking of the Pass of Melfort in the winter of 1905. The four-masted, steel-hulled ship was on its way to Seattle on a routine timber run until seasonal storms whipped up deadly waves, leaving the vessel in ruin just 160 feet off the shore of Amphitrite Point. The tragedy left 36 people dead. Since then, the lighthouse has guided sailors to safety through thick fog along rocky coasts. The most ancient layers of Vancouver Island are comprised of marine volcanic rock, formed by undersea lava deposits more than 300 million years ago. Over millennia, the calcium shells of countless marine animals added to the rock to create limestone. These ancient rocks form long colonnades that jut out into the Pacific Ocean, posing hazards for passing ships. But even more dangerous than the jagged rock is the unrelenting fog. August on the west coast of Vancouver Island is nicknamed Fogust. Two types of fog cloak the west coast: radiation and advection. Radiation fog is common during late summer and is created when surface temperatures cool rapidly at night. Groundwater evaporates into warmer air, condensing as a thin layer of surface cloud close to ground. Daytime rising temperatures typically burn off radiation fog by mid-afternoon. But advection fog can last for several days when warm, moist air blows across cooler land or water. The fog is an essential part of the Pacific Coast's rainforest ecosystem. During the dry summer, it supplies the forests with much-needed moisture. Fog drip accounts for more than 35% of the rainforest's annual precipitation. Without this thick haze, Canada's only rainforest, could not survive. Life on this remarkable island depends on the delicate balance of its ecosystems. Like waves of the Pacific shore, life here ebbs and flows in a natural rhythm. To the keen observer, this lush paradise can provide everything needed for survival.
A really big compliment that you can get in our culture is that you have been very observant. So there was a lot of time that people just spent in nature observing various things. What the birds are saying, what the tide is doing. Do you hear a rumble on the ocean that'll help you know what's going on out there in terms of swell? What the clouds are doing, which mountain tops they're sitting on top of, all these things, and you can learn so much just from that observance.
For generations, First Nations have lived off the land, looking to nature to supply shelter and food.
In the past, we managed these root vegetable gardens that were our main starches, and those were very carefully gardened and managed by specific families within the tribe.
Some First Nations communities still rely on the shores of the island for food. Living off the land demands an expert level of observance. Foragers need to be aware of the balance of supply and demand. Through the ages, the lives of First Nations were intertwined with the natural world. Aboriginal people considered the growth and reproduction cycles of plants and animals before harvesting to sustain the food supply for generations to come.
It's important to learn about whatever that resource is, not just as a human use thing, but its own life cycle and just how, under what circumstances does it thrive or not. And if you do have access to Indigenous knowledge and people that are willing to share, to respectfully ask, that's a good start.
From up high, the lush rainforests of Vancouver Island burst with life. Dense greenery is a vivid sign of a healthy forest. These aerial views also provide clues about the health of a different species. Salmon. The carcasses of salmon, dragged from spawning streams hundreds of feet inland, provide a rich source of nitrogen to nearby forests. Studies show that trees here obtain up to 50% of their nitrogen from the decaying fish. Forests made healthy by dead salmon attract more birds and insects, increasing the overall well-being of the ecosystem. As a result, lush forests like this usually indicate a healthy salmon run. There are 4 kinds of salmon on Vancouver Island. Chinook salmon is the largest. It can live for up to 9 years and reach weights of more than 130 pounds, making it the largest salmon species on Earth. These muscular fish spawn in the majority of Vancouver Island streams and rivers. Every fall, salmon return to the place they were born to lay their eggs and restart the cycle of life. It's an epic journey that can cover thousands of miles, from the wide-open Pacific Ocean to natal streams that can reach far inland. Guided by the Earth's magnetic fields and their own sense of smell, salmon find the river of their birth, then brave waterfalls and rapids to make it to their spawning grounds far upstream. Once they arrive at their destination, females can lay between 2,000 to 5,000 eggs before they become senescent, meaning they've spawned out. The high number of eggs is vital to the survival of the species. The ova are vulnerable to predators, pollution, flooding, and disease. Less than 10% will make it to adulthood, and just 2% will survive the incredible journey back to their birthplace to spawn and continue the cycle of life. South of Tofino is the crown jewel of Vancouver Island's west coast, Pacific Rim National Park. home to rainforests filled with ancient cedars and diverse wildlife. It's also home to one of the island's unexpected and rarest ecosystems, sand dunes.
In Western Canada, sand dunes and sandy beaches comprise less than 10% of our shoreline. That makes them rare, but what makes them special is that these are selected spots for a whole host of different species that only exist in sandy substrate.
Dunes are created in equal parts by wind and water. Over time, wind pushes waves and sand ashore, piling grains of sand into wind deposits. These dunes are the largest in British Columbia and are an important transitional zone between beach and forest.
These are very rare, very selected habitats for a whole host of different species and communities that only exist in select spots like here in Tofino, Ucluelet.
Migratory birds, bears, and a variety of plants and insects call the dunes home. But an intruder has put the dunes at risk.
Dune systems of this size are really rare. What we see in most coastal dune systems in the northern hemisphere is that they are slowly shrinking or stabilizing by vegetation moving in on their margins. We see that on the foredune here in response to an introduced or invasive species that's known as an American or European beach grass.
Beach grass was originally brought to Vancouver Island to stabilize coastal areas at risk of erosion. But over time, this invasive species began to block the natural transfer of sand between dunes. Without a natural flow of sand, dunes can shrink over time, endangering the plants, insects, and animals that make their home in the sand. To help fight invasive European beach grass, the park introduced a restoration program. Local community members remove the beach grass by hand, replacing it with the endangered plants.
These kids here are pulling invasive dune grass for the Dune Restoration Project. It's a very important ecosystem here, and these kids are helping to restore it.
The goal is to restore the way the wind naturally blows the sediment and shifts the dunes. By freeing up sand to move with the wind, researchers hope to maintain the natural microhabitats of the dunes.
All of these plants that you see around here, they're disturbance-loving plants. They need that disturbance, that abrasion by sand, that burial, that erosion to grow and live. And an invasive species like the beach grass will move in, choke out, and stabilize or cover the surface.
The species that we're really focused on and for this dune restoration project are 3 species that are considered endangered in Canada, and one of those is pink sand verbena.
By replacing the invasive beach grass with pink sand verbena, researchers will restore the natural rhythm of the dunes.
We've removed those grasses, we've returned these environments to a more natural regime, and we have seen the increase in a lot of those rare species that we were trying to enhance. We're making great strides in giving them a home.
On Vancouver Island, another ecosystem straddles the line between earth and water. But this place is not by the ocean. It's thousands of feet above sea level. A hidden paradise at the top of a mountain. These towering peaks split Vancouver Island into east and west. Their steep slopes retain moisture along the Pacific coast and help create lush rainforests. But historically, these thirsty forests were quenched by another source: glaciers. In the 1970s, Vancouver Island was home to more than 170 glaciers. Ice capped the peaks of many mountains on the island. In the heat of the summer, these slow-moving ribbons of ice melt and saturate the dry forests below. In the spring, melted glaciers become rushing waterfalls. In the Nament Valley, in the center of Vancouver Island, spring waterfalls flow freely. Locals refer to this area as waterfall heaven. Here, glacial runoff creates towering waterfalls. One of the tallest, Virgin Falls, cascades more than 170 feet. Rising global temperatures have reduced the number of glaciers on Vancouver Island to just 5. Fewer glaciers means less water to feed the hundreds of waterfalls that flow down from the mountains. Some scientists predict that all of Vancouver Island's glaciers could be gone within 25 years. In some cases, melted glaciers feed mountain lakes. Water from these lakes feeds the surrounding forest to create a vibrant ecosystem hundreds of feet above sea level. But as the climate continues to warm, these high alpine regions are shrinking. Within the next century, they may disappear completely. These secluded mountaintops of Vancouver Island provide a haven for fragile ecosystems. Tucked away among the mountains is Henderson Lake. This secluded body of water sits on Uchucklesset First Nations land, a region that holds special meaning to Pacific First Nations. For thousands of years, Henderson Lake teemed with salmon. Salmon runs here were among the most spectacular in the world. There was enough fish to feed entire communities. But disease, brought by European settlers, took its toll on tradition.
We've been here for thousands of years, and at one time we were approximately 8,000 warriors strong a few hundred years ago. And through the epidemics and smallpox and those kind of events, we were basically diminished to very small numbers, less than 100. And now we are growing. We are close to 300 members at this point.
Encircling Henderson Lake are the 5 sacred mountains that have guarded the spiritual secrets of Pacific First Nations for millennia. This is the Thunderbird's Nest, home of the mythical Thunderbird, a supernatural creature able to bring rain and lightning to Vancouver Island's coastal rainforest.
There's just a handful, you can count on one hand, of areas that you would call the Thunderbird's Nest. And in our language, it's called the Teetskin Powits. Every nation has stories about having thunderbirds, but not Thunderbird Nest.
According to ancient mythology, the land was home to a family of thunderbirds. 5 birds inhabited the tops of each of the 5 sacred mountains within the Teetskin Powits. Over time, the mythical birds began to leave the nest. Some were traded away to neighboring tribes during times of wedding and war, creating sacred bonds that tied communities together. The Thunderbird's Nest holds precious significance to Pacific First Nations and has never before been filmed. The land remained a well-guarded secret until loggers attempted to clear-cut the area, and members of the Uchucklesset tribe took action to save it.
Not very many outside people knew about the story of the Thunderbird's nest and our sacred ceremonies and activities we carry out in the nest. It came to light in the 90s. We were shocked and astonished to learn that the forestry company was logging out in the upper part of the Powitz. So we immediately went and met with the forest companies and asked them to cease. And after much meeting and discussions and educating them of our interest in the area, the spiritualness and the sacredness of it, they agreed to stop harvesting.
Logging this area would have been disastrous to the spiritual ancestry of more than 14 Pacific First Nation tribes.
My mother, at that time, she was about 75 years old, and she said if they're not willing to protect the area, or they're not prepared to stop logging when they were logging, she was going to make her way up there and park herself in the middle of the road so nobody can haul any wood out of there. So that's how determined our people were to ensure that logging would not happen in that spiritual area.
First Nations tribal councils now govern the area, protecting more than 5,000 acres from the logging industry for future generations. Because of its special ties to the Thunderbird, this land has been used by the Uchuclisset people for sacred rituals since long before the appearance of Europeans. Each piece of the nest holds a specific sacred purpose. The lowest mountain has a number of sacred ponds and waterfalls that are traditionally used to cleanse a member of the tribe before a difficult journey.
It's a place where our people went for ceremonies and celebrations and ceremonies ranging from one day or half a day to maybe a week to a month or 8 months, depending on what you were there to prepare yourself for.
One of the most intense spiritual practices in the Thunderbird's nest occurred prior to a whale hunt. Tribe members would camp alone among the mountains for up to 8 months, cleansing the body and mind in preparation for a hunt that, if successful, could feed an entire family throughout the winter.
People often have big reactions to the idea of whale hunting and like very kind of gut level, but I think there is a lack of understanding. There is intensive spiritual and physical preparation that takes place before going on a whale hunt, and there's so much respect for these big animals. And but the incredible thing is that one of these animals can feed so many people, and in former times the oil, the blubber of them was you know, that was so precious because there wasn't other forms of oil around here.
Smaller events took place within the nest as well. Weddings commonly occurred on its shores. Coming-of-age ceremonies played out in its woods. Community members walked these grounds while mourning the loss of a loved one, or while preparing to give birth to a new member of the tribe. These lands were a place to prepare the body and mind for many of life's journeys. Each family had their own bathing site or place of worship within the Thunderbird's nest, a place so secret that an intruder could be killed for entering the space without invitation.
Some of our people still practice these ceremonies and activities to this day. I still come up at least once a year to do usums, which is go into the water and bathe. And it's really good for relieving your mind of stress and planning for the rest of your week or your month or your year. I usually come in the winter months and go into the lake and sit in the lake for up to an hour. And it's really relaxing. You don't feel the cold of the lake. The air is colder than the water is in the winter months.
These spiritual practices, so linked with the natural surroundings, are representative of the island as a whole. This is a place where humans and nature have been inextricably linked for millennia.
We call it God's country, this whole area. It's just a place you come to and you never forget, and you don't want to leave. It's such a powerful place to be. When you're in there, you feel the presence of nature, the presence of the Creator.
From the dense canopies of ancient rainforests to the fungal roots that connect sleeping giants, from the bears and salmon that call this place home, to the many different people who live off the land. This magnificent landscape is a rugged reminder of a world that thrived long ago. From its volcanic beginnings to its powerful ocean shores. From lush rainforests to magnificent islands in the sky. It is an age-old landscape that continues to preserve ancient ways of life.